We're into part two. So second part of the event, we're going to take a look at how we can effectively illustrate our social impact, which is something that comes up fairly regularly. The reasons we need to do it are quite varied. It could be a funding application or approaching philanthropists, or it could be just part of an overall promotional strategy, something that we need to have on our website or something offline. It's probably worth mentioning that it's maybe not that realistic to establish a catch-all solution within the scope of what we're doing today. We're not aiming for that. There's obviously a lot of diversity in what we're all doing, and there's quite a degree of variation of the style of content required depending on the nature of the application or the situation when you're trying to communicate your social impact. So what we're going to try and do today is have a discussion about where some commonalities might be in getting to the point where we're putting our best foot forward, whether that's for a kind of an elevator pitch style quick format or something more in-depth and long form. There are a lot of platforms and different types of engagement opportunities, so it's a challenge for us all to get the message across effectively and quickly. We're going to discuss where it all begins, what we might need to improve or change, and we'll hopefully get to touch on modern day challenges like the fast pace of things and short attention spans and all the rest, and how we might even harness technology in communicating our mission. So we've got three great guests for us today, and thanks a million for coming on board, guys. On the furthest over, we have a very late substitution, Sam Marchetti. Sam was ambushed ruthlessly about 20 minutes ago and has kindly agreed to come on board. Thanks, Sam. Sam is the founder at ConsortiaCo. Then we have Siofra Kelly. Next to Sam is Business Development Manager at Rethink Ireland. And then we have Eamon Ryan, who's CEO of Social Impact Ireland and co-founder of social enterprise Mark Ireland. So thanks a million, guys. It's great to have you here. Can I ask you, each of you, just to briefly introduce yourselves and a little bit about what you do, quickly. Eamon.
Well, first of all, I can talk the hind leg off a dog, so
that's all right.
It's dangerous. Social Impact Ireland is actually a social enterprise started about 8 years ago, and like most social enterprises, it was never intended to be that. We just were trying to do something to support people that were doing social initiatives. And it changed an awful lot over the years up and down. What we've ended up doing, we would do, going back to the first part of the morning, we would have done a number of different supports in terms of an incubator, different programs and the rest of it. Consultancy services to the social enterprise sector. We always saw collaboration as a huge thing. It is very fragmented, people don't talk to each other in this space, they don't share, so we actually try to do things about that. And the social enterprise mark came about purely because there's so much arguments about definitions which is completely and totally wasted, right? It's simply what we were trying to do was get something that let people understand this is a social entity, is trying to actually achieve something and make it easy to actually understand. So we've been piloting that for the last 2 years now. And the last part that we do, which is probably the reason that I'm here, is we talk about articulating your impact. We do not like using the word reporting your impact, because we actually think articulating is actually much more important. The actual the verb, if my language is correct, is actually fierce important, because having an impact reporting system on your desk is pointless. You're doing it for a purpose. You need to focus on the purpose. It's part of your marketing, it's part of your engagement, it's part of creating conversations. And I suppose in the last comment would be, we've probably worked with 400 or 500 social entities over the last 3 or 4 years. So we've probably come across almost every problem. But every time you say that about social enterprise sector, another 10 problems appear that you've never come across before, 2 minutes later.
Thanks, Eamon.
Hi everybody, I'm Siofra from Rethink Ireland. Definitely feeling like an imposter here, so hopefully I can share some useful info for you. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in impact communications, but I've definitely had to figure out how to do that over the last 10 years. I've mainly worked in corporate fundraising, so I was with Temple Street Foundation and Focus Ireland, and now with Rethink I look after our corporate partners and Trust and Foundation and philanthropist relationships. So we do a lot of communicating impact, talking about the organisations that we fund, but I also look at our applications and I see the applications we're getting in from organisations as well, so hopefully I can share a little bit about that with you as well. So looking forward to hearing from my two other panellists.
Thanks, Siofra.
Hi everybody, Sam from ConsortiaCo, and I was talking to Gareth before about what we do and giving the kind of quick snapshot. In essence, we work with both for-profits and mainstream enterprises on one side and social enterprises and impact organisations on the other. For the mainstream enterprises, we bring in sustainability, social value and impact, mainly through the likes of the Sustainable Development Goals, trying to empower them with ethics and inclusive supply chains and overall social sustainability. And then for the not-for-profit sector, we teach them about tendering, we teach about digitalisation, we implement various commercial strategies, and it's all around collaborations, trying to get for-profit and not-for-profits, mainstream and social impact actors together, and really impact is probably the glue that will bring those two sectors together. So we work with the local enterprise office network, we work with certain government agencies in terms of policy development, a little bit with the European Commission, and then a vibrant ecosystem of SMEs, social enterprises and individuals.
Thanks very much. So the four of us had a chat when Naomi was on board, and one of the, I suppose, an overlooked part of the conversation, a trap that I fall into myself as well, in my haste to try and get the name out there and get funding opportunities for Oakfield Trust is basically putting the cart before the horse and not having the basics right before communicating the message. Not being clear about what our social impact is and what we intend it to be, even if we kind of thought we were clear about it before. Eamon, we probably talked about the why, the how and the who on the last call. A vital part of the process which deserves a bit of time. So can I ask you just to maybe go into some of what we were talking about on the call last week, just the importance of that why, how and who.
First of all, the importance of impact is that if you're involved in any social initiative, and social initiative now includes charities, it includes social enterprises, community enterprises, supportive services, and usually a whole range of organisations that are a mix of all of those. But if you're dealing with a social issue, impact is why you get funded. It's not what you do, it's why you do it. And from all the pitching and everything that you get in the applications, the biggest problem you have is actually trying to understand why they're doing it. If you can get the impact, then you get interested in how they might be doing it. But that's the way that you actually have to approach it.
Just speak it.
Oh, sorry?
Just
Sorry, see, definitely not used to the sound business. There was a whole problem about the language about impact, and people get into the theory of change and the rest of it. Theory of change is actually a terrible name for a very simple concept, and one that if you're running a social thing you need to get to understand. And basically, if you are a social thing, you should be able to, in your head, draw a very simple picture. The picture should say that this is our purpose, these are the activities, and in terms of doing those activities, this is the impact that we think we will achieve, and how we know we actually are achieving that impact is these are outcomes or indicators that actually shows. If you get that much right and nothing else out of the day, you know as much as me about social impact. And just before passing it on, I would give you maybe one example. And I've said I'd pick real examples as much as possible. There's a crowd in Cork that are connected with the Coke Foundation, the Ability Board. It's a bunch of people with different intellectual abilities, and what they came up with, which was a brilliant concept, is they provide consultancy services to multinationals about hiring, inclusive hiring practices. So they advise people on how to word ads. They will even sit in on interviews. They do things, a thing called Easy Read, where they take work instructions and convert them into something easy to understand. Actually, one of the things they're doing for us at the moment is trying to describe a social enterprise in Easy Read in about 3 pages. We'll let you know when that's done. But if you look at that, that's the set of activities that they do. If you ask them about their purpose, the purpose they exist for is they believe that people with different intellectual abilities are part of the collective community. They're not a separate bunch, and I know Miriam here would actually, in her connections to art, would have the same challenge. It's not trying to be separate and deal with them as a separate community. It's about making them part of the community and visible in the community and show what they're capable of in the community. So the outcomes that they are trying to achieve, yes, they want employment for people with different intellectual abilities, but equally well, they want to get it so that they are seen as just part of the community. And they're trying to educate the rest of the community to see them that way and to work with them naturally. So that's actually the impact they're setting out to do. What they do in terms of Easy Read and the rest of it are their activities. But if they're going for funding, they have to start from, this is our purpose. This is how we think we'll achieve that purpose, and this is how we know we're achieving that purpose. So this is why we picked to do this. And if you talk to us in 2 or 3 years' time, we might be doing different things, but our purpose and how we know we're achieving it says to stay. You've got to be able to get that in your head as a very simple image. If you get that, then you've mastered impact, and the rest of it after that becomes fairly straightforward. And that, by the way, is actually the theory of change. It's just a horrible name for something that's actually very, very good.
That's a tough act to follow, thanks Eamon. Yeah, on the theory of change, I would say another word for it as well that's thrown around, case for support, which is basically the same thing. But if you can get that really clear into a 1-pager, 2-pager, that's going to be your base for any sort of pitching, applications, anything that comes afterwards. So really work on that base messaging first, and then you can start adapting that. Depending on whether it's a meeting you're going into, you need to develop your elevator pitch, pitch deck. It's all going to be based on the same thing, and you can adapt. So it'll make your life a lot easier if you have that reference in the first place. But I would say the problem statement is the big thing, because most people, if they're not in the sector or are not working in the area that you're working in, don't actually know what the gaps are. They don't understand where the problems are, what people are coming up against if they're trying to access services or employment or whatever it is that you're trying to do. You really have to contextualize that for an outsider. And if you don't do that, you've kind of lost them already, because you have to get them bought in right from the start. So this is the problem, and this is why we're the right people to tackle that problem, and here's our solution. And I think if you can kind of open with that, you've got people on your side already, which helps a lot, because I think we assume a lot that people have this knowledge of all the problems that are out there, and maybe they have a little bit, but it's definitely not an in-depth knowledge. So you got to buy people in to your cause and why you're trying to do it first, before you can convince them that you're the right person to tackle it then.
I might add to first Eamon's point there about the ability board, and we use something called triggers, and the trigger is what's the motivation, the why, I suppose, in the 3 Ws. So in the case of the ability board, inclusive hiring and hiring people with additional needs and disabilities, that really only applies as a value statement in a corporate environment, because you have corporate policies, you have corporate culture, and you have the resources to employ something like the ability board. If you bring inclusive hiring into a social enterprise, we have that by nature. We're already open to that by nature. So I suppose looking at the impact that you create and matchmaking that to the target that you're looking to engage, whether they're corporate, whether they're public sector, whether they're SME, whether they're community or individuals. That trigger element can be quite important, and you can actually map those triggers quite effectively. For example, looking for companies that have inclusive hiring as a keyword or an expression in the case of the ability board. So I think making it specific, impact is great, but it's very much like a spectrum, as Martin mentioned earlier on, and you need to target that spectrum to the person or to the funder that will be ideally making the decision on the other end of it.
Great stuff.
Just actually, that's a fierce important point, that different people are looking for different things, and when you're pitching or talking to them, they're interested in where they're coming from. And I would say half the time, people don't tell you this, but if you're hearing pitches at the other side, half the time your main concern is not trying to look stupid, because you probably have no idea where they're coming from. So you actually are looking for a hooks early on to understand what you're actually talking about. And that notion of triggers, which I wouldn't have come across that before, but absolutely I get the whole concept. You're looking to see how what you do connects with the people that you're trying to establish a dialogue with. Some people think that what you do then is you look to see what their triggers are, and you kind of present yourself to their triggers. That's not it at all. What you're doing is you're understanding their triggers, and you're presenting what's relevant from you to those triggers. You get a lot of people that they look up a phone and they'll see these are the requirements, and they'll convert everything they do to fit that requirement, and you lose all authenticity then. So that notion of going to what makes sense for you is actually kind of definitely crucial.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something that's well worth thinking about. I suppose that is the temptation, isn't it? To look at the brief and to kind of mold yourself around the brief. But it's really important. Like if you have that's what establishing a strong identity is all about, really, isn't it? Doing it the other way around. Yeah. So just from my experience, I've a very small experience of this, but we had our grants applications processed back in March, and I think probably one of the common issues we had with applications, to a very extent, is just trying to figure out what people are doing. You know, you kind of try to design the application around dragging the information out bit by bit. You know, first by the elevator pitch style, then by something more long form. And then we actually had, we asked for a video for people who had brand new ideas, because we thought that was appropriate. You know, because some of them were quite abstract at that stage. I probably would ask for videos for all categories at this stage, but I suppose it was just difficult at times, because I think, in fairness to all of us, when you're so inside a project or an organisation, it's very easy to just trot out the jargon and what you're doing without actually trying and being cohesive about it. And that's kind of what we found. We'd be halfway through the application before we figured out, oh, this is what they're doing. Oh, it's great, you know. And I wonder, like, is that something you would find common with what you guys are looking at?
Yeah, there's a misunderstanding when you're talking to people that they know your experience. They don't. And part of why you're trying to articulate your impact is you're trying to get them to understand your reality. And again, an example, Sinead Ryan, no relation, she runs fitness here in Dublin, and basically what they do in terms of activities, they do dance, movement, exercises for people that are in either homeless or in the migrant hotel kind of complex and the rest of it. So if you look at that, right, like you say, okay, dance movements, that's grand. Okay, that's okay. Yeah, see use in that. Now, one of the things that she did, because she has lived the reality, she's been there. So when she talks to people, she's coming from a completely different perspective. And one of the things she did in the pitch, which I thought was actually a very good way of getting this over, is she actually showed, her first slide was actually a picture of the hotel room. of a family that was on her program. It had a double bunk bed, it had a double bed, right, and there was 3 kids, a mother, a kettle, some other things. That was their existence, and it was quite a small room. So, and her point was, this is the reality of what being homeless and living in what was a nice shelter, but it was still a shelter. This is the reality. And she says, when we come in, we take the kids away for a while. The kids feel normal. That's part of the impact that we have. For the mother, it's probably the first time she gets to probably have a cup of coffee or something with other adults for a break for a few minutes. So the reason we're doing this is, yeah, there's health benefits from the music and the kids and dancing and the rest of it, but it's much deeper than that. But when you talk to someone from a funding point of view, they haven't stood in the room. They don't see the reality. They can't see the smile on the kid's face when they've actually had the first enjoyable day where they've actually forgot about whatever problems that they actually had for the last while. They're not there for that. So part of what you're trying to do in giving people an understanding about your impact is actually get them to understand the reality of what you're dealing with. So it goes back to what Siofra said at first. It's just that problem statement. And a lot of the time you got so much passion, I think you would probably agree that, with the problem, that it's actually that passion gets in the way of actually sometimes communicating things.
Yeah, that definitely. I think the passion piece is also essential to get across, but you need to take a step back from it and I guess almost try and look at it like an outsider and how you communicate that. It's just on the application forms. I've read some really amazing ones and I've read some pretty bad ones, and the main thing when you get to the end of a bad one is you kind of go, I actually don't know what they want to do with this funding, or I don't know what that program is or who they're working with. So I would definitely advise get somebody else to read your application before you submit it. Maybe somebody who doesn't know what you do or doesn't understand it ideally, because it's that kind of outsider view that will really help you, because you're so involved in the day-to-day, you're so involved in the programs or the services you're delivering. It's really hard to realise it's not that clear from the outside. But yeah, just on Eamon's point, I would say the storytelling piece is key, and you can just have a story of one user, and if you can really communicate the difference that you've made in their lives, or what their life might have been if your social enterprise didn't exist, that's going to be more impactful to a potential funder than you explaining in 10 years' time I'm going to have 1,000 people or 10,000 people or whatever it is. That's also really important, but it doesn't really mean anything if they don't understand the impact on the individual life, and a deep impact as well. It doesn't have to be 100 people will go through the program. This program will transform, confidence levels, communicate, whatever it is, and bringing that back to the individual level, I think is the easiest way to kind of communicate that. That's always the question I ask when we're in the interviews for funding is, can you explain the experience one person will have if they come through the doors? And I think that's always the most impactful way to get it across.
I think that's a point to really drive home as well. The simple act of getting a fresh pair of eyes, someone who does not know the organisation, for the sake of that 15 minutes, it could really, really change the impact and the success of whatever application you have. I think that's it's an absolute no-brainer, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, okay, just to add to that kind of a practical step in that articulation element, particularly the qualitative style as opposed to the numbers and the KPIs. Journey mapping as a technique. Has anyone come across that before? Has anyone done a journey mapping exercise? So a journey map is at the very beginning to the very end. So in the example of the hotel room, it could be waking up in the morning, it could be going out, getting your breakfast, all the way through to the end of the day, to going to sleep. And the point is, throughout the journey map, you're trying to pinpoint where there's an impact or where there's a potential impact. Now that can be a day, That can be a month, it can be a year, or it can be a lifetime. So if you look at your social enterprise and do a bit of journey mapping, there's a lot of free tools available also online around journey mapping and templates. It can give you a bit of a structure that you can then go and, again, just develop the articulation around what you're doing.
Excellent. We're getting through it pretty fast here. I was going to jump into, I suppose, maybe some of the more technical side of things that we could talk about. Obviously, we're well into the digital age now, and there's a lot of effective tools around, whether it's editing or storyboarding or presentations and that. Would any of you like to talk about the stuff you've used or seen or anything like that? Might be. Yeah.
Just at a very high level, I'll just round off a few. We were speaking last week at the Social Enterprise Conference around ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. Just to show hands, I'm most curious, who's using ChatGPT at the moment? That's a better spread. It was actually quite a few last week. That obviously is a game changer, and knowing how to use it is really the important part there. For example, one area that I only discovered myself is spreadsheets. You can actually paste in a spreadsheet and ask questions around, where's there a gap, where do I need to focus on, how do I change this versus that. So interacting with new tools, and I know it's a very easy answer, but definitely ChatGPT and AI would be one of the most visible ones on the horizon. But then bringing it back to very simple basics, we were speaking about Canva earlier on. Very simple tool. Very brief example, we are supporting a refugee festival in Uganda at the moment with fundraising. Came in as a concept, very, very simple, and in about a week we went from gathering all the information to creating 2 posters, a front and a back, a QR code and a GoFundMe page. Very, very simple, but those 4 steps now allowed us to start generating funds and to start the fundraising process. So I think just having a couple of tools in your stack, in your toolbox, and being able to use them for the purpose of storytelling, communication, and specifically the conversion part of it, which I'm sure we'll get to in a moment. Storytelling is one thing, communicating the value, but knowing how to commercialize on that and to convert your impact into some form of a revenue or a financial support.
One of the ways that I would always probably look at things if I'm looking at it is I would look at it in terms of understanding measures and tools. I actually get a bit worried about the tools because a lot of people jump straight to tools. Okay, tools where you don't have your understanding right are actually counterproductive. So I definitely would say if you're looking at it, go that way. And the word measures, I use measures rather than metrics. I don't think I've ever come across a word that you can sort of say metrics to people, particularly about impact, and you can almost see them shiver and cringe and God knows what else. Just to explain what I think they should be, which is quite different. I don't know if any of you are watching Lessons in Chemistry or read the book that's on there at the moment. Subplot of that is that this is just a TV chef, and she's a chemist by background, so she's actually fine-tuning her recipe and she tries out different things. Sometimes it tastes better, sometimes it's worse, doesn't matter. But she's trying to optimize, I think, to come up with the right recipe. That's what measures are actually about. And the one thing that we always forget about impact is who's the first audience for understanding your impact? Yourself, exactly. Because what you're trying to do is get an understanding of why what you're doing works or doesn't work and make it better. You're trying to optimize your recipe as you go along. So if you look at that way first in terms of understanding and then get to the metrics, then you can actually get the tools that make sense. And certainly the journey mapping, just actually conversations with empathy with the people that you're working with and that you're trying to support. It's amazing how they see things quite different from yourself. Like a really trivial example, but this is down Kerry, there was a crowd that were doing household maintenance was notionally what they were doing for older folk in isolated regions. So they go along, they cut the hedge, they fix a window, change light bulbs, paint a house, all sorts of things like that. So we're talking to them about what kind of impact that they had, and we're talking to some of the people that are there, and strangely enough, from the people they were doing with was a completely different view from what people thought. They thought they were helping them in terms of making their life. But when you actually talk to the people, what they saw as important was quite different. It was a human contact in a day. It was a bit like the postman. The postman comes in, you talk to him, you have a bit of conversation. That mattered. When you talk to the girls love the service. Why the girls love it? Simply because if things looked tidy and looked after, there was less crime coming into the area, so it actually worked. So that notion of a journey map, going out talking to people and understanding how they see it, because at the end of the day, I know it's design thinking is the jargon and the rest of it, but design thinking is nothing more than sort of saying you work with the person you're trying to serve, you figure out with them, as against tell them, what works on that. And then you work out your recipe, you work out what your measures, and you try to implement that with the tool set that you have. And if you are implementing measures, don't add 10 times effort on top of yourself, make life easier. So again, another example where a guy does rural isolation is walking programs. It's much more sophisticated than just describing the shoe than walking programs. But one of the things that he did is, because he has to track the number of people that go on his walk from a safety point of view and the rest of it, by thinking that through up front, okay, so he knows who goes on what walks and how often they do and the rest of it. He puts a little bit of a survey in with a few questions after each of the walk and the rest of it. Once he's done in that, he's actually got 90% of the information he needs for his impact report, and it's actually telling him about running his business. He hasn't actually added overhead to do that, he's actually running it. So where you're actually adding stuff on, see how it fits into the overall business, okay? And if you're finding that the impact report is telling you a set of stuff, and you just want it done rather than interested in what it's telling you, then you're not doing an impact report, you're just ticking a box in terms of what you think you should do.
Yeah, just jumping in on the tools piece, and this is probably really boring from my old school fundraising. Rather than cool technology stuff, I need somebody to teach me how to use ChatGPT. So, but I would just say, like, the basic tools that I come back to every day, really boring, but your slide deck, you need a template that's ready to go. If you have to go into a pitch in a minute, all of a sudden have it ready with case studies, basic explanation of what you're doing, and then ideally a real life story. Cold email templates, warm email templates, a 2-pager you could quickly send over if you meet somebody and they're interested in what you're doing. Obviously all these things you can adapt if you need to personalise it, but make your life easy and have them ready to go from the start, and then you've got a nice basis. And yeah, I would just say on the storytelling piece, Eamon articulated really well, but it's the small details that you get from the service users or the people that you're working with will actually really make the difference. So one example, there's an organisation in Tala that runs school, or for early school leavers can come back and do the Leaving Cert, and we had them in for an event, and they brought in one of the students. He's from the travelling community and he's gone back to school at 17, and he said the big difference that the reason he went was that he doesn't have to wear a uniform. So he doesn't feel embarrassed walking through his local area in a uniform, and that was the main barrier for him to go back to school. And at this event he was amazing, he was so confident and talking about it, and he was like, I'll be the first person in my family to get the Leaving Cert when I get through this. But it was the uniform piece that was the biggest difference in his life, and it's just, I guess, it kind of contextualizes issues for people in a way that they may never have experienced before, or never have the experience of meeting somebody from that community before. And the really small details, I think that will make a big difference.
Actually, won't underestimate is the small details. People sometimes can overclaim, and they almost know, sometimes think they should make up the nice little story that will have great effect on the rest of it. If it ain't genuine, it's easy spotted. Okay, it actually devalues the whole thing. You'll figure it out dead quick. So the point of a uniform thing, if I was hearing that, what I've heard straight away if I was at the other side of that is, that's someone that actually knows what's going on. Right? They understand what's going on. So the amount of value you're putting on the person for actually knowing that is actually important. So you don't go claim that this person is going to university because of that, okay? Because there are lots of other factors that will come into play, okay? Just be confident in the value of what you're doing. Don't go beyond that, okay? Be reasonable about what you're claiming, right? And work that way. And people will figure that out, that this person actually understands their world. And that's a huge confidence thing in terms of how you're going to interact to them.
Excellent. Yeah, I just want to reverse a little bit back to what Siofra was talking about as well. I'm a little bit biased here because it's an area that really interests me, and I'm probably not the only one. And you were talking about, you know, all the stuff that you have to have ready to go, and that to me is of great interest because probably like a lot of people, you just meet these people in random situations, or it could be a friend of a friend with deep pockets who is kind of half interested in getting into this thing, but you need that stuff ready to go. And you were talking about the email templates. Thanks, Em. Talking about the email templates, the cold and warm, and what I would aspire to as well is probably suits today's attention spans and all the rest. It's like maybe having your 1 minute video as well. Because, like, you know, a busy CEO or whoever you're talking to isn't going to go through your 10-page impact report or whatever. I think that can be a really powerful piece. I can think of, you know, so many opportunities I had to do that over the last while, and it wasn't quite there. You know, and you're hoping you might even only have 30 seconds to get someone. So. You know, whether or not that involves, probably most people would have to outsource something like that, like a video. You want to do that right. But there's also, like you mentioned, Canva. I'm a huge fan of Canva, and I don't know how many people use it, but my God, it's an amazing tool, and it's free for charities. So don't let them tell you it's not free, because they will. The AI will tell you you can't have it, and then you have to ring somebody. So, I mean, for me, that everything from presentations to your social media stuff to your invitations, absolutely everything is in there, and all your photos and your graphics and everything you can pull in. I just find that such an incredible tool. Starting to ramble now, but just go back to that, just to add in the video piece and the editing and stuff you might need to outsource, perhaps.
But again, it might sound complicated. We're talking about Canva, we're talking about video, we're talking about social media, we're talking all about that. The thing is, reuse everything that you have. Okay, if you're clear on what you're about, okay, everything you collect along the way you can reuse. So if you're filling in an application for a fund, 90% of it should be the same for the next fund, because you haven't changed between the two, so it's going to be the same. If you're going to use Canva and the rest of it, if you have different events or you take photographs, keep the photographs. I know this sounds like a totally stupid thing, but the amount of times that we talk to people and we go ask them for the photographs that they might have just to fill out the Canva thing to make it look the part and the rest of it, and they won't have a clue what to have, right? And sometimes you get staggered by what's there, right? And sometimes you find absolutely nothing that's there. So it's just, it doesn't have to have huge overhead. Just anything that's relevant to what you're doing and to show what they're doing, do it. And sometimes you get amazing nuggets. That Shulella thing, for example, he wanted to make a video, and there is the thing where you're trying to show depth of impact. And well, the reason he was shooting a video on a phone, with one of his volunteers, and the volunteer was talking about volunteering and what volunteering and the Shulella thing meant to him. And spontaneously, totally unintended, the guy actually said at the end of it, he says, actually, I'm one of those guys, my wife would say I'm a fella that's way lost in his head too much. And he says, and if I'm being honest, if it wasn't volunteering for Shulella and helping you with it, I'm not sure I'd be around. Okay? And that was totally genuine, and he was very happy to share that publicly afterwards. But by God, that's just 30 seconds of video, okay, huge impact. Okay, so everything that you do, just keep it and reuse as much as possible. It doesn't have to have a huge overhead, because if there's a huge overhead, you won't do it, be honest.
Yeah, no, I would say, yeah, reuse everything. And you might think, oh, people have seen the photos before, they don't remember, so don't worry about that. And if you are doing a video or you're paying somebody to do it, get photos then as well, so you've got multiple pieces of content from the same thing. And you can use that for social, you can use that in your pitches, you can use that on your website. And I do think it's good to be consistent as well, because the branding piece, if you're carrying consistency in your imagery, etc., it actually does kind of start to filter into people's consciousness, I think. Just on the email piece, I do think video, if you're going to put one in, like a minute, max 2, people really don't pay that much attention. And on the email template as well, like you can play around with it, like see what works best, track your response rate. If you have an email, tool, you can do A/B testing, but you can just do it yourself, where you just make a note of, okay, I'm going to use this subject line and this version for these 10 people, and I'm going to do the different version for those 10 people, and see what happens. And then you'll know kind of what's working best for you, or what people are interested in hearing from you. But keep the text of the email really short. Even if you've got loads of really cool things to send them and show them, they're not going to read it if it's paragraphs long. So, one paragraph in the body of it, can you meet me, can we have a call, or whatever, and keep it simple, because attention spans are shorter and shorter.
Sorry, that bit, you're not going to convince someone in a pitch or whatever you're doing to them to actually say yes or no to you. What you're actually trying to do is get them interested to have a conversation with you. So you don't have to tell them your life story and the world and everything else. And so if they actually think, oh, that's interesting, or God, that surprises me, and you engage in a conversation with you, you're way down the road. Okay? That's what you want to do, is engagement. That's why it's articulating your impact. You're trying to get people to engage with you, to talk about what you're doing. Any way that you can do that is helpful. And where the metrics and the rest of it comes in is, if you get further down the conversation, you actually have to start showing the reality. That's fine. But you never get them to show the reality if you don't have the conversation with you. So don't overburden them at the beginning. Just get them engaged.
I might just add a visual to that. So when we design a sales campaign or an outreach strategy, so let's say a cold campaign where you're reaching out to potential funders and supporters, exactly as you both mentioned, it's about putting a little bit of bait on the line. You don't overload it. You want to have as much available on the plate for when you reel them in. So a very snappy message. We do the power of 3, an intro, a hook, and an ask. So very, very simple, maybe 3 lines in an email. And then with that, exactly as you mentioned, you're pulling them in to build a relationship. You're not going to sell somebody on the first email. And if you try to sell someone on the first email, you'll probably overcook it and miss the opportunity. So just to reiterate that it is that element of just a little bit to spark interest. And then from that, pull it in. Just to echo a little bit more on the video, the 1-minute video, I'd prompt everybody to also consider a text-based 1-pager, particularly over the next couple of months, as we're going to see more and more impact trading coming in. And impact trading is a new model where, let's say you have an SME or a for-profit business in your community, they can collaborate with you and basically use your impacts in their own reporting and their own business development. Very novel method that the Dutch and the Scottish are doing quite well. So just to get your impacts both in the video format for 1 minute, but a very simple black and white 1-pager. bullet points, intro, just a contact note, because that will be an asset that will be tradable very soon.
Excellent. Thanks. Yeah, that's great stuff on the storytelling side. So I suppose to accompany that the content that is quite obvious, then we would have probably various metrics or statistics, as we used to call them. Sam in particular, I'm thinking of the kind of things that you might be doing. What kind of common metrics or statistics or powerful kind of things do you think is indispensable in this kind of format?
So we use the 5 E's, and we created this ourselves just as a template. So if we want to work with a social enterprise, we'll start them off on this template. The first E is environment, and this is following the UK social model. They actually brought environmental into the social value policy. And then after that you have empowerment, education, employability and entrepreneurship. So environment, empowerment, employability, education and entrepreneurship. You'd be surprised what you can actually articulate in terms of outcomes and impact with those 5 areas, particularly for community groups and social enterprises. You are either empowering somebody through some form of socio-emotional well-being or role valorization. You're giving them purpose in their community, and then evolving that out, you're helping them with their education, helping them with their employability status, or even entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship. And environment is environment. So we use the 5 E's, and we can translate those 5 E's quite well into different, I suppose, funder-friendly or buyer-friendly formats.
Cool. Eamon or Siofra, when you're looking through applications, is there kind of things you expect to see on the statistics side?
I guess for us, and I'm definitely not the impact expert from Rethink Ireland, so don't hold me to this, I'll get in trouble. But I guess you just need to be clear on what the expected impact is. From our side, the fund, when people are applying for funding, it's very specific projects. So, you should have a fairly clear idea of how much that money is going to help you reach more people or cut down a waiting list or, whatever it is you're trying to achieve. But we work with each organisation to develop a bespoke impact measurement framework for each fund. So we would look at kind of key outputs and then the kind of soft metrics as well. So that there's 2 layers to it. But the hard numbers, especially if it's a corporate funder, they're going to want to know numbers. How many people, are going to get a job, or how many people are going to come out with a degree, or that kind of thing. Especially if it's a corporate. But the soft metrics are actually probably where there's more impact and more engagement if you're at that kind of philanthropist level or application level. But I think to get through the door, especially on the application form, if you don't have a number of some sort, you're probably not going to even make it to the interview stage, I would say.
I actually think relevance is a huge thing in the metrics that you mentioned. There's a big focus about SDG, okay? And you can see someone that will clip about 7 or 8 of the SDGs that they're dealing with, and get someone else that's doing one SDG. Actually, one of the things you should always remember is that a lot of social enterprises have nothing to do with the SDGs. What they're doing isn't relevant to those SDGs at all. Okay, so and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, it's really having confidence in what you're doing, that it has value, to understand the value, and then choose metrics that are relevant to that value. So as Sam has outlined the way in terms of actually analysing what you're doing, that's actually a good thing to do. But you don't have to cover everything. Okay, overclaiming is actually quite a negative, because it kind of, for example, there's a trauma responsive education, interesting crowd, 2 women in Cork set it up, and what they deal with is they train teachers for recognising kids in classroom that have suffered trauma. And when we're talking trauma here now, I'm talking serious trauma at the far end of the scale. And really what they do is if a training program teaches a teacher how to spot the signs and then how to get it into a system. Now, what are they doing? Could they claim, and bluntly, are they potentially saving lives with that? Yes, and they could give you examples of where that would be. But if they're talking about it, they don't go there, because the outcome is dependent on, all you're trying to do is get them into the first step of a recovery thing. So there's so many other variables that will come into play as to what will happen. So claiming that you are actually saving people's lives and doing that and the rest of it is overclaiming. Even though it probably is a reality, it is an overclaim. So what they would say is, what we're doing is we're helping get people into a system that gives them a chance of being saved at an earlier point. So, and one of the criteria you will find in the Social Value International's 8 criteria around how you actually do metrics, one of them is don't overclaim. Come back to yourself, either it's true or it's not, be confident in what you're doing, choose the metrics relevant to that, and tell your story.
I add to that ever so briefly, so just in terms of the confidence and the awareness to know whether your claims are right and whether you're undershooting or overshooting it, getting a third party verifier, and this again is going to be very popular, and I know when you have the social enterprise mark, which is potentially one form of verifier, but there are ways that you can have a consultant, an individual or an organisation like Eamon's to look and sign off. Now, I'm not 100% sure if you do impact frameworks as part of that, Eamon, you might be able to let me know after, but a third party to say, we've looked at that, we agree, and we've helped steer it in to a degree. For example, Michael, when we've done the SDGs exercises through a Rethink Ireland project, we looked at the SDG indicators and targets. There's 169 targets and so many indicators behind the SDGs. So rather than just say, PsyCare hits X, Y, and Z, we were able to drill it down and look at the interlinkages between education and mental health, between various partnerships and how that can transform the relevance of the client or the particular example. So just the 2 takeaways on that. See if you can get verified impacts or a verifiable sort of third party, and if you're going to use the SDGs, go a level deeper into the SDG indicators and targets, because that adds a little bit more self-assessed, verifiable information.
Yeah, and absolutely, and just on the SE mark was actually, it does include impact as one of the criteria, but the whole SE mark initiative on us is we're trying to pilot something on the grounds that at a national level there should be some recognition. We're trying to show the value of maybe having a mark. That was how we got involved in that, but that was more to do with awareness of, because a lot of people get tied up into legal structures. Is charities only, is it CLGs, can you be for profit, not for profits, all this kind of stuff. People get lost in this thing, and for a lot of the commercial world, they find it hard to kind of figure out exactly what they're dealing with. So the idea of behind a mark was something that said you're dealing with a professional organisation and they are driven by impact. That's essentially what it is. So whether it is the SE mark or whatever happens here, that was the purpose behind that. And that's where impact kind of fitted into that. So.
And just one last thing, just on the application piece. Like, I guess it's not an impact number for the sake of a number. It's what is this funding going to allow you to do that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do, and that's what the funder is interested in hearing. So it could be 50 more people, or it could be a new program for the 50 people you already serve, but what can you do that's different? I think that's probably sometimes lost in application forms.
Actually, that's a hugely important point, because one of the best questions, actually, it might have been done, the trainer actually asked this at one stage, I can't remember now, but in terms of looking at a practice pitch thing that we set up was, how exactly did you come up with the number that you're asking for? And a more disarming question you've never come across. Because if you can't answer that, you've just made it up. And all your credibility is going completely up.
Yeah, memories of Dragon's Den pitches there. Also, you reminded me that I still have to get my social enterprise mark application in, so thanks for that. 99% there, I promise. Yeah, so we covered a lot of stuff there. I just wanted to add as well, we have, so just allied to what we were talking about, you've got people who are also on the other side of it doing a more long form social impact report, should I say. I would have seen quite a few of those coming in through the applications, and you can, the presentation of those is really important clearly as well, and maybe it's worth mentioning that if you don't have someone in the organisation who has the tools, or the sometimes requires a bit of flair, in fairness, to put those together, and you can always see the people who've either outsourced it or just have that creative side to them. So any tips or anything, pitfalls you've seen around kind of the more long form social impact reports?
Just a very quick tip, whether you're using Microsoft or Gmail, you have a tool built in called Forms, Microsoft Forms or Google Forms. So we will have designed long form, longitudinal surveys using Google Forms. Again, go to ChatGPT, tell it about the concept that you're writing, ask it to develop a list of questions, and then just build those questions into forms. And you can actually have a digital tool which you can share by a QR code or a link or a button, and you just get it out, you put it on your socials, you email it around, you can print it out if you wish, but that's one of the easiest ways to get a robust longitudinal survey or long form survey out to your community. And then the beauty of that is, if you do it digitally, it collates all the information together, so you have your bar charts, your visuals, all of the information is actually there for you to then put directly into your report. So it's a little bit of a trick and a hack, but it works quite well.
Yeah, really good. I built our application system through Microsoft Forms completely. It was incredible. I just saved my bacon. Had a developer let me down at the last minute. We had like 3 weeks to get another website together and built. I never thought I'd be able to do it with Microsoft Forms. I built the whole application system in it for free. Well, not for free. We have our subscription, obviously. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many tools that can do all this stuff. Like, probably the biggest three are like the likes of Forms and Canva, and even Eventbrite around events is absolutely incredible. Just to save time, and it only takes a little bit of time to work your head around it, but oh my god, it's like having a team of 3 people almost, just using Eventbrite.
And the other thing is, do it in your authentic voice, okay? Because sometimes you can kind of, remember seeing an application for, it was something to do with early school kids intervention, and the thing was, it looked like it was written by an MBA type. It had every bit of jargon in it going, and it didn't go anywhere, but I ended up talking to the woman that was behind it, and I said, well, I was dancing around the point really, but I kind of sort of said that I was kind of surprised at the tone of it. It didn't seem to fit with her when I was talking to her. And what had turned out there was she had been a voice, she had to sound very businesslike and the rest of it. So she had got someone to write a thing in an MBA language that just did not fit at all with the kind of nature of what she was doing. What I think she should have done there is if you want to do something like that, do it in 2 parts. You can have the core logical part, but don't lose your own voice there. And if you find in your long form report that the language doesn't suit what you normally talk about, I actually find that a bit off-putting. If your Connections Arts Centre there from Miriam, she does stuff between TY years and people with different intellectual abilities and the rest of it, you'd expect to see them in it. Even the video bits and the rest of it. You want to hear a clip from them. Okay, I know Miriam's very elegant, but hearing a clip from them actually tells you about the way they run this, that they do genuinely listen to the voice and things like that. So using all the techniques, but do it in your style, because at the end of the day, when you talk to people and you're trying to convince them of something, that's the way you're going to talk to them anyway. At the end of the day, I sound this way all the time. I can't sound any other bloody way, and sometimes it does not work at all. But that's just that's just it.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I mean, like, part of the reason we all enjoy this sector is because it's full of great personalities. So you may as well use that to your advantage, right? There's a temptation to get corporate, and sometimes you have to get a bit corporate, but I think we all like to see when personality comes through. It goes a long way, as I say. I just wanted to, we're kind of at the end there, covered a fair bit. Is there anything you guys want to add just before we see if there's any questions or anything? I don't think so.
Wants to ask you.
What's that?
Wants to ask you.
You have a question for me? No, I just wondered if you had anything at all to add that you think we missed or wanted to talk about.
Just on the impact reporting piece, just a very practical thing, but depending on who the funder is, if it's a report required by a funder for a project, try and get the template or the metrics they're looking for right at the start, because it can happen that a year or 2 years down the line they come and send you a template and say, here's all the info we want about your project. And you may not have been recording that, whereas if you could get it right from the start and you know, oh, they want confidence levels, or they're looking for a number of jobs, or maybe they're looking for the salary of the jobs that, you know, the people got after, whatever it might be, you're going to make your life a lot easier if you know that right from the start, because it can be a bit of a nasty surprise sometimes further down the line, especially for big corporate foundations.
One of the things is, say someone says they've done a strategic plan, okay, and you ask, what I usually do is ask them what their strategic plan is. Just tell me the top 3 or 5 things in your strategic plan. And they'll give you a report with about 20 or 100 action items. And you know straight away they don't have a strategic plan. Because at the end of the day, a strategic plan is what's in your head. There's 3 or 4 things that you're worried about, that you're thinking about, and you're trying to do things, and you're trying to give the leadership to do and the rest of it. So they're there, and they should be there. So when someone asks you, that's actually really what they're asking you. And I think the same thing applies in terms of impact. You don't have to have all the detail in there, but the essence of what you're doing. Okay, if someone gives it to you, and it should be the same answer over and over again, because it shouldn't change that much from time to time. All the detail, the report and the rest of it that you do, that will all change in terms of content and the rest of it. But the essence of what you're about, you should be able to answer that. And I think if you look at impact from that perspective, then it's less scary than an overhead. If you see it as an overhead, then we're at nothing really, to be honest.
Just one final comment. The mainstream enterprise, so the Enterprise Ireland, the for-profit, the international markets and such, they're really getting on the impact train also, but they don't have a clue. They're starting from scratch, and they're starting from a buzzword. So I would recommend engage your local businesses, because particularly now over the next couple of years, there's going to be basically collaborations between the sectors, and if you can articulate your impacts and know your impacts and be able to work with the right corporate or even for-profit SMEs, that's an entirely new model. I know we spoke a lot about grant applications and funding streams, absolutely fine, but diversifying where your impact goes, looking at sustainable tendering, social tendering is coming, and as I said, corporate impact also. So there's a whole spectrum available of where your impact can be converted into revenue sources. So just get involved in that and build as much familiarity as possible, I suppose, because it's a very fast changing space.
And just a question to you, Sam, actually. I'm assuming you'd agree with this, but I could be wrong. That a lot of those organisations actually don't know what they mean by impact. And a lot of the funding agencies on the other side don't know what they mean by impact either. And so when they're looking at things, and if there's a vacuum, they'll come up with a set of metrics that they think sounds reasonable because they're deeply uncomfortable when they don't. Whereas a lot of the time, if you take, say, the structures I'm talking about earlier, and you think through in those lines and can show what you do connected to that, they'll take your metrics. So a lot of the time, you can actually, rather than have to try and force fit to what they're doing, right? If you actually show, actually, this is what we're about, would this be of interest to you? You actually make their job a lot easier, because I don't think they'll necessarily admit it, but half the time they haven't a clue what they should actually put down.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the main metric at the moment is environmental. That's green public procurement policy, the corporate side of that. On the corporate side, you have DE&I, so diversity, equality, and inclusion. They're very static concepts. You know, they were written up quite a while ago. They don't really reflect the latest of what's happening. So I would definitely agree, map it out and look for matchmaking, you know, look for ways to position what you're doing in these different circles, because as you said, there's plenty of opportunity for you to come across with a plate of impact and just offer it up and see where that would sit. Would that suit your team? Would that suit your customers? You know, where does this have value? And it's really just about value alignment. And when I say value alignment, there's the actual value of the impact, and then there's the core values that underlie why you're doing what you're doing. And all of that is very obvious now. Everybody's shouting about their corporate social responsibility, about their community involvement. It's very visible, and it's very topical, so it's easy to track it with a simple couple of tools.
Actually, I'm sure you probably saw this, but when the BLM movement started in the States there about 2 years ago, it actually caused a lot of multinationals in Ireland actually suddenly had to be doing things about inclusion and the rest of it, but they could. And one of the things, I used to work in multinational here years ago as well, you don't want to be seen to do what the Americans do, you want to show some difference. So now you're frantically searching around saying, well, what can we do about that will actually look like we're on top of things, okay? So you're actually out there looking. In fact, at that time, we actually had 2 corporates that came trying to know if we could find anyone that they could slot into their supply chains based on as criteria that would actually augment metrics that they thought would look well. So there is an openness there sometimes if you can help them, but it's not that they know more than you. They probably know less about this space and are actually quite nervous. I'd imagine you probably find that they're one of the things we would have seen, particularly in Ireland, because social enterprises tend to be smaller, and sometimes they get quite nervous that they could get landed with the consequences of dealing with someone. Would you have seen that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I think I'll bring it back to what you mentioned earlier about empathy. I think if you can build in an approach of empathy, obviously there's risk and there's certain unfamiliarities that you'll find, particularly kind of SME to corporate, so the middle and large businesses as opposed to multinationals. But if you can put the focus back on the empathy and try and understand what's important to them and co-creative, let them build it with you. That it's not coming in with a prescriptive, this is what we think, but this is what we have, what do you have, and look at drawing a few circles together.
Great stuff. I think like probably one of the most powerful things coming through all of it is like just the message about simplicity and authenticity. You know, if you go back to what Eamon was talking about right from your strategic plan, you know, that stuff that's in your head, the clarity, not trying to be overly flowery or abstract about what you're doing, keeping it simple and being authentic. And that's kind of comforting as well to some point for a lot of us, because it does make things easier. It's easier when you keep things simple and you're being honest about things. So listen, we better wrap things up. We're going over time. Has anyone got any questions you want to ask the panel about your situations or anything like that? No.
It's not a question, but it's a comment, Sam. You were talking about the SDGs as a framework, and I think it's, you know, like there's things that you're doing specific to your situation. The actual targets and indicators may not specifically match what you're measuring or whatever, but I think it's really important for seeing how your work in this area also impacts in this other area around and that much broader understanding of sustainability beyond green and environmental sustainability to include social and economic sustainability. So I think that's a really important, valuable tool, if you like, as a framework to use within the work of your social enterprise.
And the interlinkages.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, absolutely. That it's not just one isolated SDG by itself, but if you can look at where it is, as you say.
And I guarantee every single social enterprise in the room in the country will the work it's delivering will impact on one or more, probably more, of the Sustainable Development Goals.
And it's a common language now.
Yeah.
Like we're across the board, government, third level education and third sector, everybody understands it. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the alternative is the ESG framework, environmental social governance, which was written in the 90s, and it's very corporate, it's very document based, so even the colour and the visuals of the SDGs can be very attractive. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks, Emil. Thanks very much to Sam, Siofra and Eamon for their input today.